Ronnie's voice cracked through the diner like a whip the moment he caught sight of me. "Are you stealing my food to feed that mute kid again?" Every head in Lakeside Diner snapped toward us, forks frozen in midair, coffee halfway to lips, and in a single breath the whole room became a courtroom. I felt the judgment before I even turned around, the heat of it climbing the back of my neck. To them, I was not a waitress trying to survive another morning shift. I was a criminal, a fool, a nobody. And at the center of the storm sat Evan, curled into the corner booth by the window, his shoulders trembling under a thin gray hoodie that looked as though it had not been washed in months. His fingers clutched the frayed ends of the sleeves, tugging them over his knuckles as if hiding would make him smaller, safer, invisible. His eyes flicked up only for a moment, wide and dark and frightened, then dropped back to the table. He did not speak. He never did. And somehow that only made people hate him more. I set the plate down anyway, pancakes warm and fluffy steam slipping into the cold air like a promise I had no right to make, a small cup of milk beside it. My hands shook not from fear of Ronnie, but from the weight of every eye drilling holes into my back. Ronnie stomped closer, the floorboards groaning under his boots. "I told you last week," he shouted, "that food is not free, Nora. Not for him, not for anyone who does not pay." I stared at the pancake syrup glistening under the diner lights, refusing to lift my eyes. If I met his gaze, I knew I would lose whatever thin composure I had left. Behind me, customers began whispering. "She is crazy," one man muttered. "That kid gives me the creeps." Another woman's voice cut through the room. "Not right in the head, either of them." My face burned. I could not defend myself without making everything worse. I could not defend Evan without risking him being thrown out entirely. The boy sat rigid, frozen, the kind of fear that had no sound tightening every line of his body. I reached out slowly and slid the plate closer to him. His hand moved a fraction, just enough to brush his fingers against the warm ceramic. His breath hitched, barely audible, but I heard it. I always heard the small things with him. Ronnie slammed his fist against the counter behind me. The salt shakers rattled. "If you choose that boy over your job," he barked, "you can pack your things right now. I mean it, Nora. One more act of charity and you are out. I am tired of your bleeding heart ruining my business." I felt the humiliation gather like rain inside my chest. I also felt something else, something steadier, quieter, deeper, a thread of resolve I did not know I still had. I lifted my head at last, just enough to see Ronnie's angry, sweating face in my periphery. "I heard you," I said softly. My voice was barely a breath, but it was enough. The whispers behind me grew harsher. "Imagine losing your job over a kid who does not even talk. He is probably trouble. Kids like that are never normal." The words floated around me like trash caught in the wind, sour and sharp, cutting in all the places I already hurt. But then I looked at Evan. Really looked. The way he shrank into himself, the way he kept one hand on the plate even though he was terrified, the way he seemed to be waiting to see whether I would walk away from him like everyone else. I swallowed hard. My decision was already made. I stepped back from the table, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was slamming. "Eat," I told him gently. He blinked once, twice, then lifted the fork with fingers that still trembled. Ronnie let out a furious groan, muttering curses as he stormed toward the kitchen, already planning how to punish me for this. I stood there, shaking every muscle tight, my cheeks burning, the weight of dozens of accusing eyes pressing into me. Yet beneath all of that humiliation lived a strange calm, a truth I could not deny. They saw only a useless waitress feeding a strange, silent boy who did not belong here. They saw weakness. They saw stupidity. They saw failure. But for the first time in a long time, as Evan took his first careful bite of pancake, I felt something different settle inside me, a clarity I had not felt in years. I knew exactly why I was doing this, and I knew I would do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. I could feel the room judging me, all of them convinced I had crossed a line I should never cross. But the line they were talking about was not the one I cared about. They all looked at me like I was doing something wrong, but for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't. The walk back to my apartment after the morning rush always felt longer than it should, like the weight of the entire town pressed against my shoulders with every step I took up the cracked wooden stairs that led to the second floor of the old building by the lake. My room was small enough that if I stretched out my arms, I could almost touch both walls. The heater rattled like it was coughing up its last breath, and the window never fully closed, which meant the cold air from Cedar Lake seeped into the room no matter how many towels I stuffed along the sill. I kicked off my shoes, the soles practically worn through, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. My paycheck from last week barely covered rent, and the envelope on my nightstand from the electric company reminded me I had 5 days before my power was shut off again. I let out a long breath and pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to gather myself before the next shift. There was no luxury of rest in a life like mine. The harder I worked, the faster the world seemed to push me back down. The more I tried to get ahead, the more life reminded me that some people were never meant to climb. I should have been used to it by now. But every time I walked into that diner, every time Ronnie glared at me, every time someone laughed under their breath when I hurried by with plates stacked in my arms, a small part of me still ached. I wished I could pretend I did not care, but the truth was, I felt everything. Too much sometimes. I pulled myself together and headed back for my afternoon shift. Cedar Lake looked gray and tired under the winter sky, its surface rippling with cold wind. The street was quiet, except for the occasional truck rumbling past and the faint sound of church bells from across town. When I pushed open the diner door, the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon hit me again, familiar and exhausting all at once. Ronnie stood behind the counter, polishing a mug like he was scraping anger off it. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw me. "You are late," he snapped. 3 minutes, I answered. 3 minutes too many. He shoved the mug onto the rack and stalked off, muttering words I chose not to hear. I tied my apron and began taking orders, balancing trays, wiping down tables, filling drinks, ignoring the occasional rude comment tossed my way. A man at table 4 waved me over with 2 fingers like he was calling for a dog. "You gave that weird kid free food again this morning, didn't you?" he asked loudly. "Must be nice to have someone else work for your charity." His wife giggled not kindly. I pretended not to hear and kept moving. The trick was to never let them know their words landed. People like that fed on reactions. I had learned to starve them. But even as I worked, my eyes drifted toward the corner booth by the window where Evan usually sat. He was not there in the afternoons, only in the mornings, but the empty space still tugged at me as if he should appear simply because I wished he would. There was something about him I could not shake, the way he walked in silently every day at the exact same time, the way he pulled his sleeves over his hands like he was trying to disappear into the fabric, the way he never looked anyone in the eye except me, and even then, only for a heartbeat. He was a mystery wrapped in fear, and I knew fear when I saw it. It lived in tiny details, the flinch of a shoulder, the tremble in a breath, the way someone sat as if waiting for the world to hit them again. I delivered a pot of coffee to a booth of regulars and heard one of them whisper behind me, "Nora is wasting her time on that boy. She can barely take care of herself." Another voice chimed in, "Probably thinks rescuing some stranger will fix her own mess." Their laughter scraped something raw inside me. I kept my head down, walked back to the counter, and focused on stacking plates, pretending my hands were not shaking. Ronnie watched me from the kitchen doorway with a smirk that said he was just waiting for me to make a mistake he could punish. He thrived on power, and I was the easiest target. Still, every time the morning memory flashed through my mind, the way Evan's fingers brushed the warm plate, the way his shoulders loosened just a little when he realized I would not abandon him, something inside me steadied. The world had done nothing for him. It had not done much for me either, but that did not mean I had to turn cold like everyone else. Later in the shift, as I swept near the window, I saw fresh footprints in the thin layer of snow outside, small and uneven. Evan's footprints. He had been near the diner after all. He must have stood outside and watched from the cold. My chest tightened. Why had he not come in? Did he think he was a burden? Did he think I was in trouble because of him? The idea that he believed any of that made my throat ache. I pressed my hand to the cold glass and stared at the fading prints. Life did not give me much, but it had given me one thing this winter. A quiet boy with frightened eyes who somehow made my days heavier and lighter at the same time. Even when he was not there, he was there. And I did not know what that meant yet. But I knew it mattered, and I knew tomorrow morning I would be waiting at that corner booth again, whether Ronnie liked it or not. The next morning, the diner felt heavier than usual, like the cold from outside had slipped past the windows and settled inside the walls. I wiped down the counter even though it was already clean, trying to keep my hands busy while my eyes drifted again and again toward the door. It was almost the exact minute he usually arrived when the bell finally chimed softly, and there he was. Evan stepped in with slow, careful movements as if the ground itself might crack under his feet. He wore the same gray hoodie sleeves almost covering his hands entirely. His cheeks were red from the cold, his hair stuck to his forehead. But he was here. Relief spread through me so quietly I almost mistook it for warmth. He walked straight to the corner booth without looking at anyone, sliding into the seat as if he had memorized the shape of it. I grabbed a plate and prepared his usual sandwich without thinking, as though my hands already knew what he needed before he even asked. He never asked. He never said a word. I placed the food in front of him, and for a moment, he did not move. Then he reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and gently pushed it across the table toward me. My breath caught. Slowly, I picked it up, unfolding the worn edges. It was a drawing. A small crooked house under a tilted sky pencil lines so faint I wondered if he had drawn them in the dark. A single tree stood beside the house branches, reaching upward like they were asking for something they would never receive. And beside the tree was a figure, a woman. Long hair, no face. My chest tightened. There were no words on the page, but it felt like he had told me everything. When I looked up, his eyes flicked to mine for a single fragile second. Not long. Not enough for confidence, but enough to feel the quiet connection, something delicate and unspoken. Before I could say anything, a loud snort came from a nearby table. "What did he give you this time?" a man said to his friend. "A ransom note." The two of them laughed, shaking their heads. "That kid needs a doctor or an exorcist." Their voices snapped through the moment like breaking glass. Evan's shoulders tensed. His hands froze around his fork. I shot the men a warning glare, but they only smirked and returned to their food. I wished I could make their words disappear before they reached him, but the way Evan lowered his head told me they already had. I placed the drawing carefully inside my apron pocket. "Thank you," I whispered, even though I was not sure he would look up. He did, just barely, a tiny nod, the smallest acknowledgement, and somehow, that one nod hit me harder than any sentence could. As the morning crowd grew, I moved between tables, filling mugs, balancing plates, clearing dishes. Ronnie glared at me every time I passed by him in the kitchen doorway, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as if kindness was a crime he intended to catch me committing again. I almost brushed past him when he grabbed my arm and leaned in close. "Last warning," he hissed. "Do not get involved with that boy. I do not want social workers or police or whatever drama he drags in." I pulled my arm back before his grip bruised. "He is just a kid," I said quietly. "He is trouble," Ronnie growled. "And if he brings trouble here, it is on you." I stepped away without answering. There was no point. He would never understand that sometimes people did not need to say anything for their pain to scream louder than words. Later, when the rush slowed and most customers left, I noticed something on Evan's table. Another piece of folded paper left neatly beside his empty plate. I picked it up and unfolded it. This one was different. Two stick figures stood side by side. One was small, wearing a hoodie. The other was a woman with long hair. Between them was a small, uneven heart. My throat tightened instantly. I sat down across from him, ignoring the way Ronnie scowled from the counter. "Is this us?" I asked. Evan blinked slowly. Then he gave the smallest, shyest nod I had ever seen. Something inside me cracked open. A warmth I did not expect. A softness I had forgotten I still had. He trusted me. Not fully. Not safely. Not loudly. But in his quiet way with pencil lines and trembling hands, he was reaching toward me. I placed the drawing in my apron next to the first one. "These are beautiful," I whispered. He watched my hands carefully, as if memorizing the moment, as if making sure the drawings were safe with me. A few minutes later, he slid off the booth and walked toward the door, footsteps slow and uncertain. Just before he stepped outside, he turned back. His eyes found mine. And in that one fleeting second, everything felt clearer. He was not just a boy passing through the diner. He was lonely, lost, carrying something heavy, and for reasons I did not yet understand, he was choosing me. As the door closed behind him and the bell chimed faintly in the cold air, I realized I was already waiting for tomorrow. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever storm he was walking through, I was already standing in it with him, even if I did not understand why. The diner was already loud by the time Evan slipped inside the next morning, the kind of loud that made the walls vibrate and the air feel sharp. A group of men from the construction site across town had come in early, still smelling like beer from the night before, laughing too hard at jokes that were not funny and slamming their boots against the floor like the world belonged to them. I saw the way Evan hesitated in the doorway, his fingers gripping the sleeves of his hoodie, his head tilting just slightly as if listening for danger before he moved. My chest tightened as he hurried to the corner booth, shoulders tucked inward, shrinking into himself like he always did when the diner grew too loud. I brought him his usual plate, setting it down gently, hoping he would not notice the rough voices behind us. But the men were already watching him. I could feel it before I even turned around. "There is that weird kid again," one of them muttered loudly, just enough for everyone to hear. "Does he even talk, or does he just sit there staring at people?" Another man snorted. "Maybe he is one of those runaways. Bet he steals stuff too. Look at him!" Their voices dropped to a low rumble that made my stomach twist. I shot them a look that I hoped would shut them up, but it only seemed to fuel them. The tallest of the group stood wobbling slightly and walked toward Evan's booth with a swagger that made my blood run cold. "Hey, kid," he said, leaning over the table, his breath thick with beer. "What are you doing here every morning? Not exactly normal, is it?" Evan froze his fork, stopped mid-air. His shoulders hunched tighter as if he were bracing for a blow. I took a step forward, but the man reached out faster than I expected, grabbing Evan's sleeve and yanking it so hard his small body jerked in the seat. "Answer me," the man barked, shaking him. "Or can't you talk at all?" Something snapped inside me. I rushed across the diner, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. "Let him go," I said, shoving myself between them and pulling Evan toward me. "He is just a child." "Back off." The man sneered at me. "Why do you care so much?" "You feeding him again? That what this is?" His friends laughed from their table, the sound cruel and sharp. Evan pressed into my side like a frightened animal, trembling, his breath shallow. I could feel how cold his hands were, even through the fabric of his hoodie. "Leave him alone," I said again, louder this time. My voice cracked, but I did not care. The man's expression darkened. "You really think you can talk to me like that?" he asked. "You are a waitress. You pick up plates. You do not tell me what to do." He reached out again, grabbing the edge of Evan's pancake and throwing it across the table. The plate clattered loudly, syrup splattering across the surface like spilled paint. Evan jumped back, eyes wide with terror. Before I could stop myself, I shoved the man as hard as I could. He stumbled backward, hitting the side of another table with a loud thud. The diner went silent. A stillness fell over the room, like a held breath. Then, from the kitchen doorway, I heard the one voice I did not want to hear. "What is going on out here?" Ronnie barked, storming forward, his face twisted in anger before he even understood what had happened. The construction worker pointed at me immediately. "Your girl attacked me," he said, feigning outrage. "All because I told her to mind her own business." Ronnie spun toward me, eyes blazing. "Is that true? Did you put your hands on a customer?" He grabbed Evan. I said, my voice shaking with fury. "He frightened him. He threw his food. He was bullying a child." Ronnie scoffed loudly. "So what? He is a paying customer. That boy is not. You cannot just start fights because someone hurt your feelings." My jaw dropped. "Hurt my feelings." He grabbed him. He put his hands on a child. Ronnie leaned closer, lowering his voice until it felt like a blade against my skin. You are the problem here, Nora. You. If there is chaos in this diner, it is because of you and that boy. You are too soft and too stupid to understand boundaries, and if you ever touch a customer again, you are fired. The words hit harder than I expected, but not as hard as seeing Evan flinch when Ronnie yelled. The boy pressed himself into the corner of the booth, eyes darting between us like he was waiting for someone to hit him. I turned toward him, but he shrank back further, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Fear, not fear of the man who had grabbed him. Fear of losing me. It landed in my chest with a weight that nearly knocked the air out of me. I knelt slowly in front of him, ignoring the stares around us, ignoring Ronnie's threats pulsing in the air like poison. You are safe, I whispered, hoping he could hear the truth in my voice, even if the world screamed the opposite. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. His lower lip trembled and he looked down, shoulders shaking. The sight of him like that made something ancient rise in me, something protective and fierce. I stood again and faced the room, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and helplessness. People had already gone back to eating, pretending nothing had happened, pretending the cruelty they had witnessed was normal, pretending silence was the same as innocence. But I knew better. The quiet ones were the easiest to hurt, and people like him were the ones the world crushed first. Evan did not say a word that morning. He barely touched his food. He only watched me with wide, terrified eyes, as if the only thing he understood anymore was that cruelty follows the quiet. And by the time he slipped out the door and disappeared into the cold air, I knew something in him had changed, something that might not come back. The next morning, the sky looked wrong the moment I stepped outside, a heavy gray pressing down on the lake, and the streets like the world had forgotten how to breathe. Snow drifted in slow circles, thick and quiet, swallowing sound before it could reach the pavement. I pulled my coat tighter and hurried toward the diner, the cold slicing through the fabric like it had a personal grudge. Something inside me already felt off, a tightness in my chest. I could not name a tension that made every step feel heavier. When I pushed through the diner door, the bell chimed softly, echoing through the empty room. I wiped the frost from my hair and looked immediately toward the corner booth. Empty. No gray hoodie, no small hunched shoulders, no pencil and paper resting on the table. I felt a strange chill sweep through me, colder than the snow outside. Evan had never missed a morning. Not once. Not in rain or sleet or bitter wind. He always arrived like clockwork, like something deep in him needed those minutes of quiet warmth more than breathing. I forced myself toward the counter. Ronnie stood with his arms crossed, eyes already sharpening like he expected trouble. Do not start, he said before I even opened my mouth. The kid is probably home. Stop looking like you lost a dog. I ignored him, grabbing a plate and making Evan's breakfast out of instinct. My hands moved on their own muscle memory, shaped by dozens of mornings before this one. Pancakes, warm milk, napkin folded neatly beside the cup. I set the plate on a tray and placed it at the edge of the counter where I always set his food before bringing it over. Then I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. The door stayed still. The bell stayed silent. My heartbeat quickened. Something was wrong. I felt it in the same quiet, certain way I knew when storms were coming. I tried to take orders, but the stack of plates clattered in my shaking hands. Coffee sloshed over the rim of a mug as I carried it to a table. A customer snapped at me for spilling. Someone else muttered that I looked distracted. Ronnie hissed for me to focus, but the booth was empty, and the emptiness felt louder than everything else in the room. The pancakes grew cold. The milk stopped steaming. My breath felt shallow, stuck somewhere between my throat and my lungs. When the clock above the counter hit the half hour past Evan's usual time, I felt something inside me snap. I untied my apron, tossing it across the counter. Ronnie's eyebrows shot up. What do you think you are doing? We are in the middle of breakfast rush. Get back here. I need to find him, I said. My voice barely came out, but it was enough. If you walk out that door, he barked, you are fired. Then I am fired, I replied, already moving toward the door. His voice followed me loud and angry and meaningless. Do not come back when you realize that boy is not your responsibility, you idiot. I stepped into the cold before he finished the sentence. Snow hit my face like shards of ice, soaking my hair, clinging to my lashes. The wind cut across the street with a sharpness that made my eyes water. I pulled my coat close and started walking fast. Main Street stretched in both directions, white and quiet, the stores barely opening their doors for the morning. I checked behind the bakery where Evan sometimes lingered before coming in. Nothing. I walked to the bus stop down by the hardware store, scanning every inch of the bench, the shelter, the sidewalk. Only snow. I headed toward the grocery store loading dock where the dumpsters sat in the shadow of the overhang. I looked behind every crate, every stack of pallets, every rusted bin. No sign of him. Evan! I called, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. Where are you? My voice got swallowed by the wind. I headed farther to the alley behind the bookstore where he had once dropped a drawing when the wind ripped it from his hands. The alley was empty except for a thin layer of snow and a few frozen footprints. My heartbeat thudded painfully as I followed the trail, hoping, praying, but the footprints faded before I could trace them anywhere. I moved faster, half-running boots, slipping on the icy sidewalk. My fingers stung with cold, but I did not stop. I searched the small park across from the old post office, brushing snow from the benches, calling his name, until my throat burned. Nothing. A hollow panic started spreading through my chest, thick and consuming. What if he was hurt? What if he was freezing? What if someone had grabbed him? What if he thought I was mad at him after yesterday? The more I imagined it, the harder the fear tightened around my ribs. I turned toward the lakefront, tears stinging my eyes, and that was when I saw it. A piece of paper half buried in the snow beside the wooden railing. My breath caught. I rushed over and pulled it free, brushing off the ice. It was one of his drawings, but this one was different, rough, rushed, the lines smudged by wet snow, a small house, a big red X drawn over it. And beside it, the smallest figure he had ever drawn curled into itself like he had been trying to hide even in the picture. My heart cracked open. He was trying to say something. He was trying to tell me where he went, or maybe where he had been forced to go. I held the drawing against my chest, snow melting against my skin, and whispered the words that had begun pounding in my head with terrifying clarity. I need to find him. Snow crushed the world into silence as I ran, the drawing clutched so tightly in my hand that the damp paper nearly tore between my fingers. The red X stared back at me like a warning or a plea or both. My breath burned against the freezing air. Each exhale a desperate cloud drifting away from me before disappearing. My boots slipped on the ice as I sprinted down the narrow path behind the lake past the abandoned boathouse and toward the row of old maintenance sheds that no one had touched in years. If Evan was curled up somewhere in this cold, he would not last long. The wind cut across my cheeks like knives, and the sky had darkened to a bruised gray, heavy with more snow. I reached the first shed, pulled on the rusted door handle, and yanked it open. The darkness inside swallowed me, the smell of wet wood filling my lungs. Evan! I called, my voice shaky, echoing back at me. Nothing. I slammed the door shut and ran to the next shed. Snow filled the gaps in the wood, and my fingers stung as I pulled at the warped handle. Evan, I tried again. Still nothing. Panic throbbed through my chest. I shut the door and scanned the row, heart hammering. The wind howled. The snow thickened. And then, at the very end of the path, I saw it. A narrow gap in the last shed door, just wide enough for a small body to slip through. My heartbeat stopped for a moment before slamming back into rhythm. I rushed forward, falling to my knees as I pushed the door open. Cold air hit my face like an icy slap. Inside, the space was dim lit only by the faintest sliver of gray daylight sneaking through a broken window. Boxes were stacked along the walls, old tools scattered on the floor, but all I saw was the small figure huddled in a tight ball between two crates. Evan. His knees were pulled to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. His hoodie was soaked through, clinging to him like a second skin. His hair dripped with melting snow. His lips trembled uncontrollably, and his fingers were curled inward, blue at the tips. "Oh, God," I whispered, stumbling toward him. "Evan! Look at me. Please." He didn't react. His eyes were half open but unfocused, the kind of distant glaze that made fear claw through me. I dropped to the floor beside him, my knees hitting cold concrete. I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around his small frame, tucking it tight around him. "You are okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though panic was tearing me apart from the inside. "I am here, now. I found you. You are not alone." His breathing was shallow, irregular little gasps slipping through chattering teeth. I reached out and touched his cheek. "Ice. Pure ice. Evan," I whispered. "You have to stay with me. Please hear me. Please." I tried to lift him, but his body was stiff with cold, fragile and lifeless in my arms. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and dialed 9111. The line crackled with static. A robotic voice finally answered before cutting out again. The snowstorm must have ruined the signal. I dialed again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. My stomach twisted. I could not wait for help. Not here. Not now. If I waited, he would not survive. I gathered him into my arms, tightening my grip as his head fell against my shoulder. His skin was icy under my fingers, and every instinct screamed at me to move faster. "I am taking you home," I whispered, standing with him cradled against me. "I will warm you up. I will keep you safe. Just hang on." The wind hit us the second I stepped outside, nearly knocking me backward. Snow swirled violently, stinging my face. I kept one arm around him, holding him close, and used the other to shield his head from the worst of the storm. Each step felt like pushing through a wall of cold blades. My muscles ached. My breath came in painful bursts. Evan's weight felt heavier by the minute, not because he was heavy, but because fear made him feel like the entire world I was carrying on my back. I stumbled once, catching myself on a broken fence post. "Almost there," I whispered, even though my legs felt like they were turning numb beneath me. The path toward my apartment looked endless, the snow piling higher with every second, but I kept going, pressing him to my chest, praying he could still feel some trace of warmth from my body. By the time I reached the steps to my building, my fingers were nearly frozen stiff and my lips barely formed words. I somehow managed to pull the door open with my elbow and hurried up the stairs, my breath ragged and unsteady. Inside my apartment, the air was cold but still warmer than outside. I laid him on the couch, hands trembling as I turned on the space heater, grabbed blankets, and filled a pot with water to warm on the stove. I returned to him immediately, lifting his freezing hands and rubbing them gently. "Stay with me, Evan," I whispered. "Please stay." His eyelids fluttered barely. The first sign of life I had seen since finding him. Relief nearly broke me. I dipped a towel in the warm water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to his forehead, then wrapped another around his hands. Slowly, slowly, color began to return to his skin. A faint pink, weak, fragile. But there, when I touched his wrist to check his pulse, his fingers twitched. Then, with a tiny, fragile effort, his hand moved toward mine, brushing my wrist in the faintest plea for connection. My breath caught in my throat. He was choosing me again, even now, especially now. I leaned closer and whispered, "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." His eyes fluttered open just enough for him to see me. And in that moment, the smallest spark of trust passed between us, fragile and trembling and unbelievably powerful. He was still here, and I was not letting him go. By morning, the storm had calmed, but the world outside my window still looked bruised and heavy, like the snow had stolen all the color from the town. I had barely slept. Every few minutes, I checked on Evan, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, terrified it might stop if I blinked too long. He slept curled under my thickest blanket, his small hands tucked close to his chest, as if afraid the cold might reach him again. When his eyes finally opened, they were hazy and unsure, like he could not remember how he had gotten here. I held out a mug of warm broth. He stared at it for a long moment before reaching out with trembling fingers. "You are safe," I whispered, hoping the words would land somewhere he could hold on to. He took a sip, then another. The tightness in my chest loosened slightly, but the peace did not last long. A faint vibration trembled through the floorboards so soft at first that I almost ignored it. Then the sound grew louder, a low mechanical rumble rolling across the walls until the windows began to shake in their frames. Evan stiffened instantly. The mug slipped from his hands and clattered onto the blanket, spilling broth across the fabric. His breath quickened sharp and panicked. "It is okay," I said quickly, crouching beside him. "It is just a truck or something. It is nothing." But it was not nothing. The rumble deepened, turning into a roar that swallowed the entire street. My heart lurched. This was no truck, no storm, no train. I hurried to the window and pulled back the curtain. My breath caught in my throat. A black helicopter hovered low over the diner parking lot across the street, its blades carving through the icy morning air with violent force. Snow spiraled upward in a furious storm beneath it, swirling around the cars and trees. The machine descended slowly, deliberately, as if it had come for someone. For something. Behind it, two dark SUVs pulled into the lot, tires crunching loudly over the snow. The doors opened in perfect unison. Men in tailored coats stepped out, each wearing the same small earpiece, each scanning the area with sharp, practiced movements. My stomach dropped. This was not normal. This was not random. This was deliberate. This was a search. Evan's terrified whisper cut through the noise. "No!" I spun around. He was already on the floor, scrambling backward until he hit the couch, his hands pressed to his ears, his whole body shaking. I knelt beside him. "What is happening?" I whispered. "Are they looking for you?" He shook his head frantically, then nodded, then shook again, as if he did not know how to answer. His breath came in broken gasps. His eyes glistened with a fear so raw I felt it in my bones. I grabbed his shoulders gently. "I am here," I said. "I am with you. Whatever this is, whatever is happening, I will not let anyone hurt you." He stared at me, his chest trembling, and then suddenly the diner door across the street opened. Ronnie stumbled outside, shielding his eyes from the flying snow as the helicopter's blades slowed. One of the agents spoke briefly into a microphone clipped at his collar. Then the back door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. Even from across the street, I could feel the weight of him. Tall, strong posture. A long, dark coat that brushed the snow. Hair threaded with silver. A presence that carried both authority and exhaustion. He looked like someone who had not slept in weeks. Like someone who had been searching for something that mattered more than life itself. He walked toward the diner entrance with heavy, purposeful steps. The bell above the door chimed faintly as he pushed inside. "Nora," Evan whispered. The way he said my name was not spoken, not exactly, more like breathed, pushed through trembling lips. I touched his hand. "Tell me," I said. "Please." But before he could answer, a sharp knock rattled my apartment door. 3 firm strikes, authority without aggression, but still terrifying. Evan gasped and buried his head in my arm. I rose slowly, my legs trembling. I approached the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs from the inside. I hesitated, then opened it just enough to see who stood on the other side. It was the man, the one from the SUV. Snow clung to his coat. His gray eyes were fierce and tired and searching. "Are you Nora Matthews?" he asked. His voice was deep, steady, carrying a weight that made the hallway feel smaller. "Yes," I managed. He exhaled shakily like he had been holding his breath for days. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I am Rowan Hale. I have been searching for my son for 32 days. He disappeared from the mountains. We found one of his drawings last week. It led us here." My throat closed. My heart stumbled. I stepped back as realization crashed over me. Evan was not just a lost boy. He was a missing child in a national search. And the man standing in my doorway was his father. Rowan looked at me with eyes full of grief and hope, and something that looked dangerously close to breaking. His voice cracked as he spoke the next words. "Is my son here?" "Behind me." Evan let out the faintest sound. A quiet whimper. Rowan's entire face changed. He pushed forward instinctively, but I raised a hand. "He is scared," I whispered. "He is freezing. He is not ready. Please, go slow." Rowan froze in the doorway, breath shaking. "Is he alive?" he whispered. I felt my eyes burn. "Yes," I said. "He is alive." Rowan closed his eyes, a shuddering breath escaping him, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Please," he said softly, "let me see my boy." Rowan stood frozen in the doorway as if he were afraid that any sudden movement might break the fragile moment holding all three of us together. I stepped aside, but kept my body angled protectively in front of Evan, who was trembling so hard the blanket slipped halfway from his shoulders. Rowan took one slow step into the apartment, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the small figure curled on my couch. Everything in him changed at once. His breath hitched, his shoulders sagged, and a sound escaped his throat that was not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, but something raw and broken. "Evan," he whispered. Just that one word. Soft, reverent, terrified. Evan flinched at the sound burrowing deeper into the blanket. I placed a hand gently on his back. "You are safe," I whispered. "This is your dad." Rowan moved slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. He knelt on the floor a few feet away, his knees sinking into the thin rug, his coat brushing against the hardwood. He did not reach out. He did not try to touch him. He simply looked at him with a kind of aching love that made my chest tighten. "I have been looking for you," he said, voice cracking. "Every day, every night. I never stopped." Evan shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. His small hands covered his ears. Rowan swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "I know you are scared. I know you went through something I should have protected you from. But I am here now. I am not leaving without you." Evan curled tighter, his breath quickening into shallow gasps. His fingers twisted in the blanket like he was trying to anchor himself to something real. He whispered something so faint it barely existed. "No." Rowan flinched like the word had cut him. He leaned forward slightly, tears sliding down his cheeks. "Please," he said softly. "Please look at me. Please let me see your face." Evan shook harder, pressing his forehead into my shoulder. I pulled him close, one hand on the back of his head. Rowan's eyes flicked to mine, desperate. "What happened?" he whispered hoarsely. "Where did you find him? How long has he been alone?" I shook my head. "I do not know much. He just came to the diner every morning, always alone, always quiet. I thought he lived somewhere nearby, but he never talked. I didn't even know his name until today." Rowan closed his eyes, pain washing over his face. "He disappeared while we were in the mountains. He wandered off during a storm. The nanny slipped on the ice. When she woke up, he was gone." He took a trembling breath. "We searched everywhere. Helicopters, search teams, bloodhounds. I hired specialists. And every day the trail grew colder." His voice cracked until he started drawing. Evan's head jerked slightly at the word, his eyes flickering open just a fraction. Rowan noticed. "You sent us drawings," he whispered. "Little houses, a tree, a woman." He looked at me, tears pooling again. "The woman. It was you, wasn't it?" I felt my throat close. I had no idea what to say. I only knew that Evan pressed closer to me as if the truth itself frightened him. Rowan wiped his face with the back of his hand, steadying himself. "I am not here to take him away from you," he said, voice low but certain. "Not like this. Not when he is terrified. I just need him to know he is not lost. Not anymore." I nodded and turned to Evan. His eyes were wide, shimmering with fear and confusion. "He is your dad," I whispered. "He is not angry. He is scared too. He has been searching for you. He loves you." Evan's lip trembled, his fingers dug into my sleeve. "No," he whispered again. "No, take me." Rowan's face crumpled. "I am not taking you from her," he said quickly, leaning closer without touching him. "I promise. I swear to you. I am not here to force you. I just need to know that you are alive. I need to tell you I love you." Evan's breathing stuttered, his chest rising in frantic little jumps. His eyes darted between me and Rowan, torn between the safety he felt and the memories he feared. And then, without warning, he cried out, a small sound thin and broken like a wounded animal calling for help. He grabbed my shirt with both hands and buried his face against me. His whole body shook as sobs tore from him silently. Rowan watched, shattered. "He trusts you," he whispered, "more than anyone." I held Evan tighter, my eyes burning. He was terrified out of his mind, caught between past trauma and present truth. I could feel it in every tremor of his body. "It is okay," I whispered, rocking him gently. "You can stay right here. I am not letting anyone take you." Evan's crying quieted, though the tremors stayed. Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head and looked at Rowan for the first time. Just a glance. Just a flicker of recognition. But it was enough. Rowan broke completely, tears falling freely. "Evan," he whispered, voice shaking. "My boy." Evan blinked, his mouth opening slightly as if he wanted to speak but could not force the words out. Instead, he let go of my sleeve and reached one trembling hand toward Rowan. Not fully, not confidently, but willingly. Rowan did not touch him. He placed his hand on the floor, palm open close enough for Evan to reach if he chose. Evan hesitated, then pressed his small hand into Rowan's palm. Just once. Just for a second. But that 1 second was everything. Rowan sobbed into his free hand, overwhelmed, and I watched the truth settle into the room like a fragile miracle. Evan had not been running from his father. He had been running from fear, from memories, from something that happened the day he disappeared. And for the first time, he had let someone reach him through the darkness he had been trapped in. He chose that moment. He chose that hand, and he was not choosing alone. He was choosing with me beside him. The next morning began quietly, almost too quietly, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. I stood in my small kitchen making tea with hands that still trembled from everything that had happened the night before. The steam curled upward in soft white ribbons, warming the cold air, and for a moment I leaned on the counter just to steady myself. Evan sat curled on the couch, wrapped in my blanket knees, tucked close. His eyes drifting over the room like he was trying to memorize every corner, every shadow, every place where fear could hide. Rowan stood near the window across the room, staring out at the snow-covered street in a silence that felt weighted with 1,000 unspoken things. He looked different in the daylight, less severe, more human. The exhaustion carved into his face was unmistakable, but so was something softer. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. When Evan shifted slightly, Rowan turned around immediately as if he had been listening for that exact movement. "Do you want something to eat?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Evan blinked slowly, then nodded once. I made toast and eggs, simple and warm, and set the plate in front of him. He hesitated before lifting the fork, glancing at Rowan with wary eyes. Rowan did not move closer. He only lowered himself into a chair across the room, hands clasped together as if holding himself still was the only way to keep from rushing forward. "Eat, sweetheart," I whispered. Evan took one small bite, then another. His shoulders softened just a little. The morning light spilled across the floor, pale and quiet. For the first time since everything began, I let myself exhale. After breakfast, Rowan cleared his throat. "I can stay at the inn down the street," he said, still keeping his distance. "I just thought it might be better to remain nearby, in case he needs something, or in case he wants to—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Evan's eyes flicked toward him, then toward me. He moved closer to me instinctively, leaning against my arm. Rowan closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying his breath like he was trying not to break. "You should stay close," I said gently. "He will feel safer knowing you are nearby." Rowan nodded, the slightest relief softening his features. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything you have done. I know words are not enough." I shook my head. I did what anyone would have done. "No," Rowan said quietly. "Most people would not." His voice cracked in a way that made me look away before emotion swallowed us both. When it was time to head downstairs, Evan clung to the sleeve of my coat. Not tight, not desperate, just enough to say he did not want to face the world without me. I placed my hand gently over his. "We will go slowly," I whispered. The stairs creaked beneath our feet as we descended. The cold air slipped through the cracks in the building, brushing against our faces. When we stepped outside, the snow glittered under the weak winter sun. The streets quiet, a few people shoveling their sidewalks or brushing snow from their cars. I expected Evan to pull back. Instead, he stepped closer to me and slipped his hand into mine. The gesture was so small I almost missed it, but I felt it like a heartbeat. We walked toward the diner together, Rowan trailing behind at a careful distance. A few townspeople glanced our way, but none approached. News of the helicopter landing and black-suited men had spread fast, and now the air carried a hush of curiosity and unease. When we reached the diner door, Evan stopped. His fingers tightened in mine. The bell above the entrance jingled faintly, and I felt him flinch. "It is okay," I murmured. "No one will hurt you." He looked up at me with those dark, cautious eyes, and I saw the question there. The fear. The memory of yesterday's cruelty. I squeezed his hand. "I am here," I whispered. He nodded once, then followed me inside. The diner fell silent. Forks paused in midair. Coffee mugs lingered inches from lips. People stared, openly, whispers already forming behind hands. I felt my heartbeat rise. Evan's small fingers dug slightly into my palm. Rowan remained just outside the door, watching through the glass with a face that carried every emotion at once. Ronnie appeared from behind the counter, eyebrows shooting up so sharply they nearly touched his hairline. "What is this?" he snapped. "You bringing that kid back here after what happened. 2 days in a row, you caused chaos, and now you think you can just walk in and act like nothing happened." I stepped forward, shielding Evan. "I am not here to fight," I said. "He just wanted to sit in his booth." "That is all." Ronnie scoffed. "He wanted to sit here. He is not your kid, Nora. He is not your responsibility." Evan pressed closer to me, shoulders tensing. And then it happened. A small sound, barely audible. A shaky whisper he forced through trembling lips. "Please." Ronnie blinked, stunned. The entire diner seemed to freeze. Evan had spoken. The boy who had not uttered a word in weeks, or months, or longer. He stepped forward, gripping my sleeve, his voice cracking as he whispered again. "Please, stay." My heart nearly broke open. I knelt down quickly so I could look him in the eyes. "I am staying," I said. "I am right here." Behind us, someone murmured, "Is that the missing boy from the news?" Another whispered, "The one the billionaire is looking for." Heads turned toward the window where Rowan stood. His presence alone sent another wave of whispers through the room. But Rowan did not enter. He waited, steady, patient, letting Evan choose. Evan turned slightly, noticing him, and something in his expression changed. Cautious curiosity, recognition, the smallest flicker of memory. He tugged my sleeve gently. He whispered, pointing at Rowan. "Is he?" His voice trailed off. Rowan slowly opened the diner door and stepped inside, moving carefully like approaching a wounded animal. His eyes shimmered. His voice was barely a breath. "Yes," he whispered. "I am your dad." Evan blinked, breath trembling. Then he leaned into me, terrified, yet trying to understand. I wrapped an arm around him and held him steady. This was a new morning, a painful one, a fragile one. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, no matter how broken, always held something worth fighting for. Rowan stayed in town after that morning, not in the loud, dramatic way the helicopter had arrived, but quietly, almost humbly, as if he were trying to shrink himself down to the size of this little world Evan trusted. He checked into the small inn across the street from my apartment, the one with creaky floorboards and a neon vacancy sign that flickered whenever the wind hit just right. Every morning he walked to the diner just after sunrise, not demanding to see his son, not trying to force anything. He simply sat at the counter with a cup of black coffee and watched from a distance as Evan settled into the corner booth beside me. The townspeople whispered. They always whispered. "That is the billionaire," someone murmured one morning. "Why is he still here?" Another asked. "Why is he watching that waitress?" The eyes burned holes into my back, but Rowan never reacted. He did not correct anyone. He did not care. His focus stayed entirely on Evan, and somehow, even though the boy barely spoke, something between them began to shift. Slowly, carefully, gently. Evan had started saying small words again, always soft, always directed at me first, like he needed to test them in my presence before letting the world hear them. Toast, please. Warm milk. Stay close. Every word was a tiny miracle. Rowan listened as if each syllable was a priceless gift he was terrified to break. On the third morning, Evan arrived carrying something in his hands, a drawing. He walked straight to Rowan without prompting, stopped a foot away, and held it out with trembling fingers. Rowan did not move at first. His breath caught his eyes shining. Then he reached out and accepted the drawing with both hands like it was something sacred. I watched from behind the counter, heart twisting at the sight of it. The drawing showed 3 people, a small boy in a hoodie, a tall man in a dark coat, a woman with long hair, all holding hands beneath a sun with crooked rays. Rowan pressed the picture against his chest, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he whispered. Evan nodded once, then hurried back to my side, slipping into the booth as if the moment had drained him. Rowan stared at the picture for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it inside his wallet. Not a folder, not a briefcase. His wallet, close to him, always. Later that afternoon, when the diner had emptied and the quiet settled in, Rowan approached me as I wiped down the tables. "Do you have a minute?" he asked gently. I nodded, unsure of what he needed. He gestured toward the door. "Walk with me for a moment, if that is okay." I glanced at Evan. He watched us with wide, alert eyes, but after a moment, he nodded as if telling me it was safe to go. I stepped outside with Rowan. The cold air bit lightly at our cheeks, but the snow had softened into a calm, white sheet across the town. We walked beside the lake, the surface frozen and still. Rowan spoke first. "I have spent the last 10 years building companies," he said quietly. "They have made me rich, respected, untouchable in some people's eyes." He paused, staring at the frozen water. "But none of it has ever made me feel the way watching Evan trust you does." My heart beat faster. I kept my eyes ahead, letting him speak. "When he disappeared, I thought I had failed as a father. I blamed myself. I still do. Every night." His voice cracked. "But you brought him back, not just to safety, to himself." I shook my head. "I did not do anything special." Rowan stopped walking and turned to me. "Yes, you did. You saw him when no one else did, and you cared enough to stay." His breath fogged in the air as he exhaled. "I want to build something because of that." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, gathering the right words. "I own a foundation," he said. "It funds programs for at-risk kids across the state. But the truth is, most of it is disconnected from the real world, from real children, from pain." He looked at me directly. "I want to create something different, something hands-on, healing, safe, a place where kids like Evan can come back to life." My stomach tightened. I felt where this was going. "And I want you to help me run it," he said softly. "Work with me. Build this place with me. Be part of something that matters." The wind slowed. The world hushed. I stared at him, stunned. "Rowan," I whispered, "I am a waitress. I do not have degrees or training. I can barely pay my bills. I am not qualified for something like that. You are more qualified than anyone I know," he said. "You have something you cannot teach. You understand the kind of loneliness a child cannot explain. You see things others miss." He looked down, his voice softer. "Evan chose you, not me, not the search teams, not the specialists. You." I felt tears prick my eyes. "What if I fail?" "Then we fail together," he said simply. "But we try. For him, for kids like him, for the ones who go unseen." The lake shimmered under the pale sun. My breath came shaky, my thoughts scattering like snowflakes caught in the wind. It felt impossible, too big, too heavy, too important. But then I remembered the way Evan held my sleeve when he was scared, the way he whispered please, the way he had trusted me with pieces of himself he did not give anyone else. I inhaled slowly. If I say yes, I whispered what happens next. Rowan smiled faintly, a smile filled with relief and gratitude. Then we start planning. We find a space. We build a place where no child has to disappear to be noticed. I looked back toward the diner where Evan's small face was pressed against the window watching us. His breath fogged the glass in a tiny oval. I felt something settle inside me, a quiet certainty, a calling. "Okay," I whispered. "I will do it." Rowan closed his eyes, breathing out a trembling smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "You just changed more lives than you know." And as we walked back to the diner, Evan opened the door before we reached it, his small hand reaching out for mine, as if he had known all along that something important had begun. The center took shape faster than I had imagined, not because Rowan pushed with money or influence, but because the town surprisingly quietly, almost shyly began to help. People who once whispered behind napkins and coffee cups now showed up with paint cans and toolboxes and trays of baked goods. Maybe it was because they had seen the helicopters that day. Maybe it was because they saw Evan's small face peek out from behind my apron every morning, or the way Rowan carried himself with a father's brokenness instead of a billionaire's distance. Whatever the reason, Hearthlight Haven rose from the bones of an old library on Willow Street, its cracked bricks scrubbed clean, its windows replaced, its halls warmed with soft yellow lights. I spent my days coating walls with calming colors and my nights learning everything I could about trauma-informed care, scribbling notes until my eyes blurred. Rowan, for once, did not lead from the head. He led from the heart. He arrived early each morning, sleeves rolled up carrying boxes, climbing ladders, spreading mulch in the garden behind the building. Evan trailed after us, both silent but content, his hoodie sleeves brushing my hands every few steps as if to check I was still beside him. When we finally unlocked the doors for the first time, the smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of the baked cinnamon rolls I had brought. Evan stood just inside, gripping my hand as Rowan held the ribbon. A handful of children from the community shelter stood waiting with wide eyes and nervous shuffles. "Ready?" Rowan asked. His voice wavered slightly, something no one else would have noticed. I noticed everything now. I nodded. Evan squeezed my fingers. Rowan cut the ribbon and the children stepped inside cautiously, their voices small, their feet unsure. But the magic happened slowly. A girl with tangled curls chose a crayon from the art corner, then another child joined her. A boy with a stutter began stacking blocks in a corner, humming softly to himself. Joy replaced fear 1 inch at a time. The sun came in through the windows and the warmth spread across the floor like a blessing. Evan watched them all with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Then he did something that stunned both Rowan and me. He walked toward a little boy who was sitting alone, knees pulled to his chest. Evan crouched down, offering him a crayon. The child hesitated, then reached for it. Evan looked at me and smiled. Small, shaky, but real. My throat burned. Rowan stood behind me, voice barely above a breath. He is becoming himself again. Days turned into weeks. Hearthlight Haven grew loud with laughter, soft with tears full of life, in ways I had never imagined. I became the person everyone ran to first. When a child panicked, they clung to me. When someone refused to speak, they sat near me until their breathing steadied. When someone needed a warm snack or a gentle voice or a moment of silence, I was the one who provided it. I never expected to be the anchor. I had spent most of my life drifting. But now, finally, I felt rooted. Rowan watched me with a kind of quiet awe that made my pulse trip every time our eyes met. He stepped back and let me lead, though he helped however he could. He learned how to make peanut butter sandwiches in bulk. He learned which kids were triggered by loud noises and which ones needed soft, classical music to fall asleep during naps. Sometimes I caught him reading books late at night in the small office, researching how to help children process loss. He was changing. I was changing. Evan, most of all, was blooming. His words came easier now, soft but steady. He began telling me what he liked, what scared him, what made him feel safe. He sat with other children and helped them draw clouds or trees or crooked little houses. He laughed for the first time one afternoon when a puppy from the local shelter visited. The sound was so pure that I had to turn away to hide the tears that sprang into my eyes. One evening, after a long day, I found Evan asleep in the reading nook, curled up on a beanbag chair, a book half open on his chest. I carried him to the quiet room, and as I laid him on the small bed, his hand reached for my wrist even in sleep. I froze. His fingers curled around me. I whispered softly, "I am right here." He sighed and relaxed, still holding on. When I turned around, Rowan was standing in the doorway. He looked at Evan, then at me, and something raw and tender flashed across his face. He stepped inside slowly. "He loves you," he said quietly. I swallowed. "I love him too." Rowan inhaled a shaky breath and nodded as if sealing something inside himself. That night changed us. It shifted the air between Rowan and me. We moved through the following days in a careful closeness, speaking softly, sharing small smiles that lingered a moment too long. The kind of connection that grows not with passion, but with shared heartbreak, healed together. One late afternoon, as the sky dimmed to lavender, Evan tugged on my shirt. "Nora," he whispered. His voice was clear, soft, sure. I kneeled down so we were eye level. "Yes, sweetheart." He looked at me with those deep brown eyes that had once held nothing but fear. His lips trembled, then he said it. "Mom." Everything inside me shattered and reformed all at once. My knees gave out and I found myself on the floor staring at him as tears blurred my vision. He reached forward and touched my cheek. "Mom," he said again. Rowan turned away quickly, but not before I saw the tears fill his eyes. He covered his mouth with his hand and leaned against the wall, shoulders shaking once. I pulled Evan into my arms, holding him tightly, my heart beating against his small body like it was trying to break free. I whispered, "I am right here. I am here, baby." For the first time in my life, the word mother felt like truth. Not something I lost, not something I failed, something I became, by love, by choice, by him. And that was the moment we stopped being three people trying to heal. We became a family. Evan's birthday arrived on a soft spring afternoon, the kind where sunlight felt warm enough to melt every piece of winter that had ever lived inside us. Hearthlight Haven buzzed with life from the moment we unlocked the doors. Children raced through the halls carrying streamers and balloons, their laughter echoing against the freshly painted walls. Someone had brought cupcakes piled high with blue frosting, and the smell of vanilla hung heavy in the air like a promise. I stood in the center of it all, watching the joy unfold as if it were a dream I did not dare touch. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the handmade paper crown the kids insisted I wear its crooked tips brushing my forehead. Evan hovered close to me, cheeks flushed with excitement, sleeves of his new sweater pushed up just a bit because he liked the way it felt. Rowan was outside setting up the treehouse he had secretly built overnight, adding the last details to the wooden railing. Every time I looked at him, my heart warmed in that slow, quiet way I was still getting used to. He glanced back through the window at one point and smiled at me. A real smile. The kind that said he no longer lived with constant fear his child would vanish again. When it was time for the celebration to start, someone dimmed the lights. The chatter grew hushed. 100 tiny voices sang happy birthday with the kind of chaotic sweetness that only children can create. Evan stood in front of the cake hands clasped together, eyes shining in the glow of the candles. But instead of blowing them out, he turned around. The room fell silent as he walked to the small microphone we used for story time. The cord dragged behind him. His steps were small but sure. I felt my heart seize. Rowan blinked hard and lowered himself into a chair as if bracing for impact. Evan cleared his throat a sound so soft I almost missed it. But when he spoke, his voice carried through the room with surprising strength. "Last year, he said I didn't have a voice. I didn't have a home. I didn't have anyone." A few children in the back shifted closer to their caretakers. Staff members covered their mouths. I pressed a hand to my chest. Evan continued, "I was scared all the time. I thought if I spoke, nobody would hear me. Or they wouldn't want to." His small fingers tightened around the microphone. But then, someone found me. His eyes lifted and locked onto mine. My breath caught. She found me even when I hid, even when I didn't think I mattered. I felt tears burn hot against my eyelids. Rowan lowered his head into his hand. Evan's voice wavered but did not break. She kept me warm. She kept me safe. She didn't ask me to talk. She just stayed. The room blurred as tears filled my vision. Evan turned slightly, looking toward Rowan. And my dad, he never stopped looking for me. Even when I was lost, he kept trying. Rowan's shoulders shook once silently. Evan stepped back from the microphone. I don't need to make a wish this year, he said softly, because everything I ever wished for is already here. The room erupted in clapping and cheers, but I barely heard anything. I was already moving toward him, pulling him into my arms. He held on tight, burying his face into my neck as his little body trembled with emotion he no longer feared. I whispered, I am so proud of you, over and over, my tears falling into his hair. When I finally let him go, Rowan stepped forward. He wasn't wearing his usual guarded expression. His eyes were wet open, vulnerable in a way I never thought I would see. He looked at Evan first. You amaze me, he whispered, stroking his son's cheek with a trembling hand. Then he turned to me, slowly, deliberately, and sank down on one knee. My breath froze in my chest. Gasps rippled through the room. Children crowded the doorway, craning their necks to see. Rowan pulled a small velvet box from his coat, opening it with a shaky exhale. Inside sat a simple silver ring. Engraved on the inside were 6 small words. Where you saved us, we stay. My knees nearly buckled. Rowan looked up at me, his voice thick. Nora. He said you gave my son his life back. You gave me hope when I had none left. You stepped into a darkness that wasn't yours and brought light with you. Not because you had to, because that's who you are. The world around us seemed to quiet as if the entire building held its breath. Rowan continued, You taught Evan to trust again. You taught me to breathe again. And you brought us home in a way I never thought possible. His lower lip trembled. Will you marry me? Will you build this family with us? Not because of duty, but because we choose each other. Evan reached up and placed one of the dandelions he had been holding into my hand. Say yes, Mom, he whispered. I broke, completely. I nodded, laughing through sobs. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I want this. I want you. I want us. The room exploded into cheers as Rowan rose and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a trembling embrace that felt like everything I had been searching for without knowing it. Evan squeezed between us and hugged us, both tiny arms wrapping around our waists. Rowan kissed the top of his son's head, then mine, his breath shaky with relief. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, the 3 of us walked to the entrance of Hearthlight Haven, where a new wooden sign had just been installed. It read, The family we choose becomes the home we keep. Beneath it, in Evan's handwriting carved carefully into the wood, We are not lost anymore. I reached for Rowan's hand. Evan took the other. And for the first time in my life, I felt what home truly meant. Not a place. Not a building, a choice, a promise, a family built from love that refused to let go. If this story reached a place in you that life has kept quiet for a long time, then maybe this is the moment you let yourself breathe a little deeper and remember that kindness still matters in a world that often forgets the quiet ones. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in Nora, in the way she kept choosing compassion, even when people called her foolish, even when the world treated her like she did not belong. Maybe you understood the fear in Evan's silence because you once lived through a storm that stole your voice too. Or maybe you felt something shift inside you when Rowan fell to his knees, not because he is a billionaire, not because he arrived in helicopters, but because a man's heart finally found what it was searching for all along, and you saw the truth of it in his eyes. Stories like this do more than entertain us. They remind us why we keep going. They remind us that even after loss, even after abandonment, even after the coldest winters of our lives, there is still a chance for something warm to find us again. Maybe it has been a long time since you believed in second chances. Maybe you forgot what hope feels like. But if this story settled into your chest, if it made you pause or swallow hard, or blink faster than you meant to, then please stay with us a little longer because these moments we share at the end of every story are where healing happens quietly. You might not say it out loud, but I know how many of you are carrying things you never talk about. The grief of someone you lost too soon, the guilt you still hold on to from a moment you wish you could rewrite, the loneliness that creeps into your home after the lights go off, the feeling of being unheard, unseen, or unchosen in a world that moves too fast to notice. But here you are not invisible. Here, you matter. Here your heart has a place to rest. And if there is one thing this story teaches us, it is that families are not only born, they are chosen. They are built in diners and cold nights and whispered reassurances and the small, brave moments where someone finally says, "I am here," and means it. Maybe you have been strong for too long. Maybe you have been silent like Evan, or tired like Rowan, or overlooked like Nora. But you stayed, and that means something. So before you go, I want to ask you to do something simple, something small, something that helps these stories reach the people who need them the most. If this story touched you even just for a second, hit the like button so more people can find it. Leave a comment if you feel called to share a memory or a lesson or even just a few words that came to you while listening. You never know who your voice might comfort tonight. And if you want more stories that remind you of the goodness still left in this world, stories that help you feel less alone on the hard days, stories that bring back the warmth you thought you lost, then please subscribe to this channel. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but because somewhere out there, someone like you is waiting for a story that tells them they still matter. Stay with us, stay kind, stay human, and let the healing begin one story at a time.